The sound had become a kind of cruel lullaby over the past 3 nights, blending with the rhythmic hum of the radiator and the rasping breaths of my daughter sleeping fitfully in the next room. Emma's fever had finally broken an hour ago, but the dark circles beneath her eyes and the persistent cough that rattled her small chest told me we weren't out of the woods yet. I sat hunched on the couch, cocooned in a threadbare cardigan, my phone clutched between trembling hands. The screen's pale glow threw harsh light on my own reflection. Hollow eyes, tangled hair, exhaustion carved into every line of my face. This was not how I'd imagined motherhood. Sleepless nights in a drafty apartment, counting coins to pay for medicine, and praying that the man who'd promised to love us would at least remember we existed. I typed the message slowly at first, my thumbs heavy with fatigue. Emma's sick again. Rent's due tomorrow. You promised Calvin $200 this week. Please, Mike, we need it. I hovered over the send button, my heart pounding. 3 months since he'd paid anything. 3 months of excuses, silence, and lies. Rage bubbled beneath the exhaustion, and before I could stop myself, I added one more line. A reckless jab born of desperation. I know you got money from the Castelli job. Don't make me call them. I hit send before doubt could stop me. The message flew into the void, a scream hurled at a man who probably wouldn't even bother to reply. I sank deeper into the couch, burying my face in my hands. I hated how pathetic I felt, how powerless. The minutes dragged on, the only sound the rain hammering the windows and the faint wheeze of Emma's breathing through the baby monitor. I was about to turn off my phone when it buzzed, and in my hand, relief surged. Maybe this time he'd finally taken responsibility. But the words that appeared on the screen turned my blood to ice. Who is this? It wasn't Mike's number. My heart stumbled in my chest. In my fog of sleeplessness, I'd texted the wrong contact. Some forgotten number buried in my phone's memory. I quickly typed an apology. Sorry, wrong person. Please ignore. The reply came almost instantly. What Castelli job? I stared at the screen, pulse roaring in my ears. Every instinct screamed at me to throw the phone away, pretend it never happened. But exhaustion dulled my judgment. My ex works for someone with that name. My mistake. 3 dots blinked, then vanished, then returned. Your name. Now. A chill crawled down my spine. This wasn't curiosity. It was command. I set the phone down, my hands suddenly slick with sweat. This was a mistake. A terrible, possibly dangerous mistake. I stood and crept to Emma's room, needing to see her chest rise and fall, needing the comfort of her warmth. She stirred, but didn't wake when I brushed damp curls from her forehead. Back in the living room, the phone buzzed again. And again. I forced myself to look. I already know who you are, Sophia Ellis, 22. Westbrook Avenue, apartment 3B. Your daughter is feeling better. The phone slipped from my fingers, clattering to the floor. My breath caught in my throat. How could they know about Emma, about her illness? My gaze darted to the window, to the rain-slick street below. And that's when I saw it. A black SUV rolled to a slow stop in front of my building, engine idling. Then another pulled in behind it, and another from the opposite direction. Within minutes, 5 of them had formed a silent perimeter around my block. Their headlights cut through the rain, and though I couldn't see through the tinted glass, I knew whoever I'd just texted was inside. One of those vehicles. The phone buzzed one more time, coming up. The words stared back at me like a death sentence. My heart thundered as I backed away from the window, instinctively moving toward Emma's room. Somewhere deep down, I understood that my life, our lives, had just changed forever. All because of one desperate text sent to the wrong number. The pounding on the roof from the storm had grown heavier, each drop against the glass like a ticking clock counting down to something I wasn't prepared to face. My heart hammered so hard it hurt as I stood in the dim light of our living room, the glow from the street lamps bending through the rain-streaked window. The 5 black SUVs remained where they were, their presence too deliberate, too still. Whoever was inside wasn't just waiting, they were watching. I moved toward Emma's room on instinct, every muscle trembling, She was sitting up now, rubbing sleep from her eyes, her stuffed rabbit clutched tightly against her chest. "Mommy, why are you scared?" she asked in a small voice that nearly shattered my resolve. I forced a smile I didn't feel, brushing her curls back from her forehead. "Everything's fine, sweetheart," I whispered, though my voice cracked. "Just stay here no matter what happens." Back in the living room, the silence pressed in on me. Then heavy footsteps echoed up the stairwell, slow, deliberate, unhurried. They stopped just outside my door. My breath hitched. The cheap lock and flimsy deadbolt suddenly felt like a joke, nothing but cardboard against a storm. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence, no knock, no voice. Then my phone buzzed where I'd dropped it on the couch. "Open the door, Sophia." My chest constricted. They knew my name. They knew Emma was sick. They were right outside. If they'd wanted to force their way in, they would have by now. Whoever was out there wasn't breaking in because they didn't need to. They expected me to come to them. And the worst pay, or it was a small, terrified part of me believed they would find a way in, even if I didn't. The knocking started then, but it wasn't frantic or violent. It was soft, controlled, a steady rhythm that chilled me more than pounding fists ever could. Whoever stood on the other side was patient and confident. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here because they already had the upper hand. I looked once more toward Emma's room, torn between barricading the door and confronting whatever waited. But something deeper than fear stirred inside me, a primal instinct that whispered I had to face this. Running would change nothing. Hiding would only delay the inevitable. With shaking hands, I slid the chain free and turned the lock. The door creaked open just enough to reveal a figure standing in the hallway light. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in an impeccably tailored black suit that clung to his powerful frame like armor. A hint of rain clung to his dark hair, and when he looked at me, his eyes, impossibly blue and cold, seemed to slice right through every layer of my fear. "Sophia Ellis," he said, not asking, but stating it like a fact he had known his entire life. "I believe we need to talk about Michael Donovan." My knees nearly buckled at the sound of Mike's full name, a name no one but his mother ever used. "Who are you?" I whispered, my throat dry and raw. He stepped forward into the weak glow of the apartment light. His face was sharp, all hard angles and quiet menace. "My name is Alessio Castelli." The name hit me like a blow. Castelli. The name Mike had mentioned during one of our final screaming matches. The job. The money. The promise. Now here he was in my doorway with men in black SUVs and eyes that said he knew everything. I tried to close the door, but his hand shot out, stopping it effortlessly. He didn't push. He didn't force. He simply held it there. The message clear. Running was no longer an option. "That would be unwise," he murmured. "Your daughter is sleeping. Let's keep it that way." Hearing Emma mentioned by this stranger was worse than any threat. My blood ran cold, and my mind spun. "I don't know anything about what Mike did," I said, hating the tremor in my voice. "We've been separated for almost a year." "Yet you know enough to mention my name," he replied, his tone calm but sharp, enough to try and use it against him. It was just something he said once, I stammered. I was desperate. Alessio's eyes scanned the shabby room around us, the pile of unpaid bills on the counter, the child's toys scattered across the carpet. Then his gaze returned to me, colder now, more calculating. "May I come in?" he asked, though we both knew it wasn't a request. "Unless you prefer this conversation where your neighbors might overhear." From somewhere down the hall, a door creaked. Mrs. Abernathy, the elderly woman who sometimes watched Emma, peeked out, her expression worried. "Everything all right, Sophie?" she called. Alessio turned toward her, and in an instant his entire demeanor shifted. He smiled, polite, disarming, utterly harmless. "Just bringing Sophie some paperwork from the office, ma'am. Sorry for the disturbance." Mrs. Abernathy hesitated, then nodded and closed her door. Alessio turned back to me, the smile gone as quickly as it had appeared. "Now, may I come in?" I swallowed hard, every nerve screaming at me to run, but I knew deep down that this man wasn't someone I could hide from. With trembling hands I stepped aside, letting him cross the threshold, and as the door clicked shut behind him, I realized that whatever nightmare Mike had dragged us into had finally arrived, and there was no going back. The moment Alessio Castelli stepped into my apartment, the air seemed to change. It grew heavier, tighter, like the room itself was holding its breath. He didn't move quickly or aggressively. He didn't need to. His presence filled the space like smoke, seeping into every corner, every breath I took. The man radiated the kind of power that didn't need to announce itself. It was simply understood. And that terrified me more than anything. He glanced around the small living room, his sharp eyes sweeping over the second-hand furniture, the peeling paint, the stack of unopened bills on the table. His gaze lingered for a moment on the framed photo of Emma and me from the park last summer. It was a simple picture, her cheeks smeared with ice cream, my hair a mess. But the way he studied it made me feel naked, exposed. "You're not here by accident," I said finally, my voice shaking despite my efforts to sound strong. "You knew who I was before you came." Alessio turned toward me, his movements precise and deliberate. "Michael Donovan worked for me for 3 years," he said calmly. "He was a low-level employee, nothing important. But 6 weeks ago, he was given a job, a simple delivery of a flash drive. He decided to keep it for himself." A cold knot formed in my stomach. "I don't know anything about that." His eyes locked on mine, and for a terrifying second, I thought he could see straight into my thoughts. "Maybe you don't," he admitted. "But you sent me a message mentioning my name and a job you shouldn't even know about. That makes you part of this, whether you want to be or not." I wanted to scream that I had nothing to do with Mike's choices, that I'd barely spoken to him in months, that the only thing we still shared was a child he'd abandoned. But Alessio's expression told me that none of that mattered. In his world, guilt was contagious. He took a step closer, and I instinctively stepped back until my knees hit the edge of the couch. He wasn't threatening me, not exactly, but his presence pressed against me all the same. "Michael didn't just steal Maz. Oni," he continued. "He stole information that could destroy everything I've built. Names, accounts, locations. People will die if it falls into the wrong hands. And because of him, they're already looking for you and your daughter." The word daughter hit like a gunshot. I moved instinctively toward Emma's room, putting myself between Alessio and the hallway. "You leave her out of this," I warned, my voice trembling. "She has nothing to do with Mike." Alessio's gaze softened almost imperceptibly. "You're wrong. The moment Michael betrayed me, everyone connected to him became involved. That's how this world works. And if I can find you this easily, so can my enemies. The Russians. The men he's trying to sell to." The name made my blood run cold. I had seen news stories. Brutal murders, disappearances, entire families wiped off the map without a trace. If those men were after Mike, then they were after Emma too. Alessio sat down, his voice quieter now, but somehow more dangerous. "I'm offering you a way to protect her. Both of you. Come with me tonight. I'll take you somewhere safe until I find Michael and recover what he stole." Safe. The word sounded foreign coming from him. Nothing about this man felt safe. He was a storm wearing a suit, a hurricane disguised as calm. But outside of this apartment, there were darker storms waiting, ones that would show no mercy. "And if I say no?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Then I walk away," Alessio said, rising to his feet. "My men leave, and you will be on your own when the people Michael betrayed come looking. They won't knock on the door, Sophia. They won't ask politely. They will take what they want, including your daughter." For a moment, the world seemed to tilt beneath me. My heart raced so fast I thought I might pass out. It wasn't a choice. Not really. It was a question of how Emma and I would die. In a hail of gunfire from strangers, or in the back of a black SUV with a man who terrified me but hadn't hurt us. "I need to pack," I whispered. Alessio nodded once, checking his watch. 5 minutes. Only what you need for a few days. I stumbled into Emma's room, my hands shaking as I grabbed clothes, medicine, her stuffed rabbit. She blinked sleepily when I helped her into a sweater. "Where are we going, Mommy?" she mumbled. "On a little trip," I said, forcing a smile, "somewhere safe." Minutes later, we were walking down the stairwell, Alessio in front, one of his men behind us. The rain had stopped, but the night was darker than I'd ever seen it. The SUVs were still there, engines rumbling like beasts waiting to move. When the door closed behind us and I climbed into the back seat with Emma in my arms, I realized there was no turning back. My old life, small, difficult, familiar, had ended the moment I pressed send on that text. And now I was stepping into something I didn't understand, something bigger, something deadly, and it was only just beginning. The city blurred past the tinted windows in streaks of wet neon as the black SUV sped through the rain-soaked streets. Emma had fallen asleep against my chest, her tiny body heavy and warm, clutching her stuffed rabbit like it was the only piece of home she had left. I stared out into the night, my reflection ghost-like in the glass, and tried to make sense of the nightmare my life had become. Hours ago, I had been begging for child support. Now I was sitting in the back seat of a vehicle flanked by armed men, being driven to an unknown destination by a man whose name whispered fear into the darkest corners of the city. Alessio sat beside me, silent and unreadable. His posture was relaxed, his hands resting casually on his knees, but there was nothing casual about him. He radiated the kind of control that made everyone around him adjust their behavior without realizing it. I wanted to hate him for dragging us into his world, but deep down, I knew the truth. It wasn't him, it was Mike. Every bad decision he had ever made had finally caught up with us. "Where are you taking us?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. "Somewhere no one can reach you," he replied without looking at me. "Somewhere even the men your ex betrayed would think twice about stepping into." The rest of the ride passed in tense silence. The streets grew wider, cleaner, quieter as we left the city's chaos behind and entered a neighborhood that looked like it belonged to another world entirely. Iron gates loomed ahead, guarded by men with earpieces who waved us through without question. The SUV rolled up a long cobblestone driveway lined with towering trees and soft golden lights. At the end of it stood a mansion that looked more like a fortress, sleek and modern, all glass and stone, with no visible weaknesses. The driver stopped at the front steps. Alessio stepped out first, scanning the surroundings before gesturing for me to follow. My legs felt like they might give out as I climbed from the SUV, Emma still asleep in my arms. The night air was colder here, sharper, carrying a silence so complete it was almost unnatural. "Welcome to my home," Alessio said, his voice softer now, but no less commanding. "For as long as you're under my roof, nothing will harm you or your daughter." I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. Harm had already been done. My life had been ripped apart in a single night. But instead, I nodded and followed him inside. The interior was breathtaking. High ceilings, marble floors, walls lined with art that probably cost more than I'd make in a lifetime. Yet beneath the beauty, there was an edge, a quiet menace in the way cameras tracked every angle and guards moved like shadows at the edges of the hall. It was a palace, yes, but it was also a cage. A woman with silver hair and sharp eyes appeared as we entered. Rosa Alessio greeted her, his voice softening slightly. "Prepare the East Suite. They'll be staying for a while." The woman nodded without question and gestured for me to follow, as he climbed a sweeping staircase. I glanced back at Alessio. He was speaking quietly into a phone now, his expression unreadable, his presence still filling every inch of the space. I turned away quickly, my heart pounding. The suite Rosa led us to was larger than my entire apartment. A sitting room opened into a spacious bedroom with a king-sized bed, and through another door, a smaller room clearly prepared for Emma. I laid her gently on the bed, brushing a curl from her forehead as she stirred and sighed in her sleep. Rosa returned with a cool cloth and a glass of water. "For the fever," she said. "A doctor will arrive in the morning." "Thank you," I murmured, unsure why I was thanking anyone in this situation. When she left, silence filled the room again. I walked to the massive windows and pulled back the curtain. Beyond the manicured gardens, a tall security wall loomed, topped with motion sensors and cameras. Beyond that, darkness. No city lights. No streets. No escape. I sank onto the edge of the bed, staring at the sleeping form of my daughter. Everything I had done, every choice I'd made since that first text, had been to protect her. But looking around, I wasn't sure if I had saved her or delivered her into even greater danger. The door opened softly behind me. Alessio stepped in, his presence filling the room even without a word. "You're safe here," he said quietly. "Try to rest." "Safe," I echoed bitterly. "I'm trapped." He studied me for a long moment, then stepped closer. "Trapped would imply you had a choice to begin with. You didn't. This is the only place where I can guarantee she'll wake up tomorrow." "And Mike?" I asked. "What happens when you find him?" Alessio's jaw tightened slightly. "That depends on how cooperative he decides to be." I wanted to ask more, but he was already leaving. His final words lingered in the air like smoke. "Get some sleep, Sophia, tomorrow. Who changes everything?" When the door closed, I curled up beside Emma and listened to the hum of security systems and the distant echo of footsteps in the halls. Sleep came in fragments, broken by flashes of black SUVs, cold blue eyes, and a voice that promised safety in one breath and danger in the next. Somewhere deep inside, a truth was taking root. This wasn't just about a stolen flash drive anymore. It wasn't just about Mike or the Russians or the choices that had led me here. Something far bigger was unfolding, and we were now part of it, whether we wanted to be or not. The morning light filtered through gauzy curtains, painting the walls in soft gold, but it did nothing to quiet the storm raging inside me. I hadn't truly slept, only drifted in and out of uneasy dreams filled with faceless men and dark alleys. Emma stirred beside me, her small hand tangled in my shirt, her breathing steady now that the fever had broken. For the first time in days, she looked peaceful. It should have been comforting. Instead, it terrified me. Peace in a place like this felt like the calm before something catastrophic. A knock on the door jolted me fully awake. Rosa stepped inside with a tray balanced carefully in her hands. "Breakfast for the little one," she said, setting down a plate of fruit and pancakes beside the bed, "and Mr. Castelli wishes to speak with you once you are ready." I wanted to refuse, to demand he leave us alone, but deep down I knew that wasn't an option. The man who had surrounded my building with armed vehicles and brought me here in the middle of the night wasn't asking for a conversation. He was summoning me. I dressed quietly while Emma devoured her breakfast, her attention captured by a cartoon playing softly on a tablet Rosa had provided. She looked so normal, so blissfully unaware of the danger swirling around us, that for a moment I considered pretending none of this was happening. But the illusion shattered the moment I stepped into the hallway and followed Rosa down the corridor toward Alessio's study. The room was everything I expected from a man like him. Dark wood, heavy leather chairs, shelves lined with books and framed photographs of men shaking hands in expensive suits. But my eyes were drawn to Alessio himself, standing by the window with his back to me, phone pressed to his ear as he spoke in rapid Italian. He ended the call the moment he noticed me. "Sophia," he greeted, his voice calm, measured. "I trust you're settling in." I folded my arms, refusing to sit when he gestured to a chair. "Rosa said you had something to tell me." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he slid a manila folder across the polished desk toward me. "We searched Michael's apartment last night. What we found may change how you see him." I hesitated before opening the folder, but curiosity, or dread, got the better of me. My breath caught the moment I saw the contents. Photographs. Dozens of them. Emma playing at the park. Emma leaving preschool. Emma sitting on the stoop outside our building. Some included me walking beside her, holding her hand. Others showed her alone. My skin crawled. "What is this?" I whispered, my voice breaking. "He's been watching you," Alessio said, his voice low, controlled but edged with anger, "or paying someone to do it." These were pinned to the wall of his apartment. I flipped through the photos, my hands shaking, my mind spinning. Why would he— "There's more," Alessio interrupted, producing a second folder. Inside were photographs of unfamiliar men, stern, hard-faced men in expensive suits, their expressions cold and calculating. These are Petrov and Banov, leaders in the Russian organization your ex is trying to sell to. My heart thudded painfully. Mike isn't stupid, I whispered. He wouldn't cross people like this. Wouldn't. Tee-hee, Alessio countered, his gaze locked on mine. The same man who abandoned his sick daughter, who's months behind on support, who used your name as leverage, wouldn't he? The worst was still to come. Alessio reached into a drawer and pulled out a small pink backpack, faded, decorated with unicorns. It was Emma's, the one she'd outgrown last year. Inside were her passport, a change of clothes, her favorite storybook, and several $1,000s in cash. The room tilted. He was going to take her, I whispered. He was planning to run. It seems that way, Alessio said quietly. I believe he intended to use what he stole to negotiate safe passage, and having his daughter with him would make it harder for me to eliminate him. Tears blurred my vision. All those nights I begged him to visit, all those times Emma asked when Daddy was coming, and all along he was planning to steal her away. How do I know you didn't plant this? I demanded, my voice rising. Maybe this is all part of your plan to force me to help you. Alessio didn't flinch. To what end, he asked calmly. If I wanted to force your cooperation, I could have done so last night. I don't need elaborate lies. He was right. As much as I wanted to deny the evidence in front of me, I couldn't. The photos, the backpack, the passport, none of it was fabricated. And the betrayal carved a wound so deep I wasn't sure it would ever heal. What do you want from me? I asked, my voice hollow. Help me find him, Alessio said, before the Russians do, before he does something none of us can undo. And if I refuse, then I walk away, he said simply. And I guarantee they will find you long before I do. I looked down at the photo of Emma laughing in the park, her face lit with joy, blissfully unaware of the darkness gathering around her. There was no choice. Not anymore. Mike had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and if I wanted to protect my daughter, I would have to step into a world I swore I'd never touch. Fine, I whispered. I'll help you, but when this is over, Emma and I disappear. New lives. Alessio studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Help me recover what he stole, and I will make sure you vanish so completely that not even Michael Donovan could find you. It was a deal with the devil, but the devil was the only one offering us a way out. The rain had returned by the time I held the phone in my trembling hands again. It streaked down the tall windows of Alessio's study like veins, each drop beating a reminder of how far I'd fallen into a world I didn't understand. Across the desk, Alessio sat silent, watching me with that unnerving calm that made it impossible to tell whether he was my savior or my captor. The deal had been struck. My freedom and Emma's future in exchange for one thing, bringing Mike out of hiding. I took a deep breath and dialed the number I'd memorized long before our lives fell apart. The call rang once, twice, 3 times. My pulse raced with every unanswered second. Then his voice, hoarse and wary, broke through the line. Who is this? It's me, I said, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles ached. We need to talk. Now. There was a pause so long I thought he might hang up. Sophie. His voice was barely a whisper. Where are you calling from? This isn't your number. I swallowed the fury burning in my chest. That doesn't matter. We need to meet. Are you and Emma okay? He asked quickly, the false concern in his tone igniting something bitter inside me. Don't pretend to care, I hissed. I know about the photos, Mike. I know about the backpack, the passport, the cash, everything. Silence stretched across the line, thick and heavy. It's not what you think, he said finally, slipping into that pleading tone I knew too well. I was just preparing in case what I snapped, in case you decided to kidnap our daughter and disappear, in case you needed a bargaining chip against the people you stole from. His sharp intake of breath told me I'd struck a nerve. Who have you been talking to? It doesn't matter. What matters is that I know. And if you don't meet me, I'll go to the police. I'll tell them everything. About the flash drive, the Russians, the job. All of it. You don't have it, he said quickly, panic bleeding into his voice. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I asked, keeping my tone cold. "You were careless, Mike. You left copies." There was another long silence. "Don't go to the police," he said at last. "Please, you don't understand what you're dealing with. Then meet me. Tonight, 8 o'clock. Bluebird Coffee on Riverside Drive. It's a public place. Either you show up or I burn your entire plan to the ground." He hesitated, and for a moment I thought he'd refuse. "Fine," he said finally. "But just you." "No, Emma." I hung up without another word and set the phone down, my hands still shaking. Alessio was watching me intently. "Well done," he said, his lips curving into the faintest trace of approval. "It wasn't an act," I said flatly. "Every word of it was true." "I know." His eyes softened, but only slightly. "And now the real work begins." "What do you mean?" "Michael won't come alone," Alessio said, leaning back in his chair. "If he's desperate enough, he'll bring backup. Possibly even Petrov's men if he's made contact. We'll be ready for them." I folded my arms, the defiance in me rising again. "I've done my part. I'm not going to that meeting." His brows lifted slightly, but he didn't argue. "Fair enough. My men can handle the rest." For a moment, silence stretched between us. Then he stood, slipping his hands into his pockets, his gaze locked on mine. "You're smarter than he ever gave you credit for." "Most men underestimate me," I replied bitterly. "I won't make that mistake." The rest of the day passed in uneasy fragments. Emma played in the garden under Rosa's watchful eye, feeding koi in the fountain and laughing like she didn't have a care in the world. I watched, her from the terrace, my chest tightening with every giggle. She deserved a life free from this madness, but that future depended on what happened tonight. As the hours slipped away, Alessio's estate transformed. Men I hadn't seen before arrived in sleek black vehicles, their movements precise, their faces expressionless. Weapons were checked and loaded, radios crackled with coded instructions. The calm before the storm had ended. War was coming. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, Alessio was ready. He appeared in the doorway of the sitting room, dressed in another dark suit, his demeanor colder, sharper. The businessman gone, replaced by the man who commanded fear. "It's time," he said simply. "Be careful," I told him. "Mike does unpredictable things when he's cornered." "I've dealt with far worse than Michael Donovan," he said, but there was something in his voice, a flicker of gratitude, maybe even respect. And then he was gone, his footsteps fading down the hall until the silence swallowed them. I tried to read, to distract myself, but the words blurred on the page. Every distant sound, the slam of a car door, the murmur of voices, made my heart jolt. I put Emma to bed early, her small body curled around her stuffed rabbit, oblivious to the chaos her father had unleashed. When the clock crept toward midnight, the knock finally came. It was soft but deliberate. Alessio stood on the other side of the door, his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled up, his eyes harder than I'd ever seen them. "It's done," he said. "Mike?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. "Alive for now," Alessio replied, "and very willing to talk." The flash drive was recovered, along with every copy. "You and Emma are safe. From him. From the Russians. From all of it." I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, a weight lifting off my chest. But before relief could set, lay in, Alessio stepped closer, his voice low and deliberate. "Now we decide what comes next, because this," he gestured between us, to the house, to the invisible world beyond it, "is far from over." The rain had finally stopped by morning, but the air outside Alessio's mansion still carried the heavy silence of a storm that had only paused, not passed. I stood at the tall window of our suite, staring out at the manicured gardens beyond the glass, but my thoughts were miles away. Back at a coffee shop where Mike had been dragged into a black SUV instead of ordering his usual espresso, back to a world that was now closing in on us with invisible hands. Emma slept soundly, her breathing soft and even, her fever long gone. For the first time in weeks, she looked peaceful. But peace, I was learning, was an illusion in Alessio's world. It was a space between crises, a breath before the plunge. And deep down, I knew something worse was coming. A knock pulled me from my thoughts. Alessio stepped into the room without waiting for permission. He looked different this morning, not the controlled, calculated Mafia boss from the night before, but a man burdened by decisions that could not be undone. The faint shadow under his eyes betrayed a sleepless night. "It's over," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "You said we were safe now." "From Mike, yes," he replied. "From the Russians, no." A chill crept up my spine. "What do you mean?" "His men intercepted a message this morning," he explained. "It seems Petrov knows Michael has been taken, and he knows who took him." I didn't need to ask how. The Russians were ruthless and efficient. If they wanted information, they got it. And now they knew about us. "They'll come for him," I whispered. "They'll come for all of you," Alessio corrected, his voice grave. "Michael is useless to them now without the drive, but they'll still want revenge. They'll want to make an example, and they'll use whatever they can to find me, including you and Emma." I felt the ground shift beneath me. We'd survived the first wave, but the storm wasn't over. It was gathering strength. So what now? "Now, we make you disappear," Alessio said, his tone matter-of-fact. "New names, new lives, new countries if that's what it takes. By tomorrow, Sophia Ellis and Emma Donovan will no longer exist." It should have been a relief, a chance to start over, but the thought of vanishing, of leaving behind everything we'd ever known, felt like another kind of death. "And you?" I asked. "I stay and clean up the mess your ex made." There was something in his voice, something final, that twisted in my chest. It wasn't just about duty or vengeance, it was about sacrifice. "I don't want to run," I said quietly, surprising even myself. He turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Then you're a fool." "Maybe I am, but I'm tired of running from Mike's mistakes. From my own mistakes. I want to face this." He studied me for a long time, his gaze searching for cracks in my resolve. Finally he sighed. "There may be a way, but it's dangerous." "I'm already in danger," I reminded him. "Tell me." "Petrov will come for Michael first. If he doesn't get what he wants, he'll go after leverage. You, Emma, anyone he can find. But if we control the narrative, if we feed him what he expects, we might draw them into a trap." "A trap," I repeated, my pulse quickening. "We leak information," Alessio explained. "Make them believe Michael had one last copy hidden somewhere only you know. They'll come for you. But this time, we'll be waiting." The plan was insane. It was reckless. It was the kind of thing only a man like Alessio would even consider. But as terrifying as it was also the first real chance to end this. Not just to survive, but to fight back. I glanced at Emma sleeping peacefully on the bed, unaware of the war being plotted around her. If it means she'll never have to look over her shoulder again, I'll do it. Alessio nodded once, his jaw tightening. "Then, we begin tonight. My men will leak the story. Within 48 hours, Petrov will make his move. And if we fail," I asked, "then we don't get a second chance." The rest of the day passed in tense preparation. Men moved through the mansion like ghosts, installing new layers of security, checking weapons, planning escape routes. Alessio's command center, a room filled with screens and encrypted devices, became the heart of the operation. Every detail was scrutinized, every possibility accounted for. As the sun sank beyond the horizon, the house fell into an unnatural stillness. Emma had been moved to a reinforced safe room deep within the estate under Rosa's care. I stood in the study, my hands trembling slightly as Alessio fitted a tiny earpiece into my ear. "Once they breach the perimeter, you stay put," he instructed. "My men will handle the rest. And if they take me before you can reach me," I asked. "They won't," he said firmly. "But if they do, you keep them talking. You make them believe you know where the drive is. No matter what happens, you don't break." I met his eyes, and for the first time, I saw something there I hadn't expected. Trust. "You're not just bait, Sophia," he said quietly. "You're the key to ending this." The clock ticked past midnight, and the house held its breath. Somewhere out there, Petrov's men were already on the move, and as the shadows deepened and the tension thickened, I realized that the wrong text I had sent days ago had not just rewritten my future. It had turned me into the one thing I had never been before: a weapon. The night was too still. Even the air felt different, charged with something invisible and dangerous, like the city itself was holding its breath. Somewhere deep in my chest, instinct whispered that the storm was about to break. Not the kind that came with rain and thunder, but the kind that left everything it touched in ruins. I stood near the wide window of the study, watching the shadows shift across the courtyard. Alessio's men were everywhere, hidden in places I would never have thought to look. On the rooftops, behind hedges, stationed near the gates with unmarked rifles and silent radios. They moved like ghosts, controlled and efficient, the embodiment of a man who trusted no one and prepared for everything. Down the hall, Emma was safe in the reinforced panic room beneath Rosa's watchful eye. I'd kissed her goodnight hours earlier, lingering longer than I should have, memorizing the way her small fingers clung to mine. If tonight went wrong, if Petrov's men were smarter or faster than Alessio anticipated, that might have been the last time I held her. The thought was enough to make my knees weak. Alessio entered the room without a sound, as if he'd materialized from the shadows themselves. His suit was darker than the night outside, his eyes sharper than I'd ever seen them. The calm confidence he wore like armor was still there, but beneath it, I caught something else. The quiet intensity of a man who knew blood might be spilled before dawn. "It's time," he said simply. "The bait's been laid. The message is out. Petrov's people believe Michael hid a copy of the drive somewhere only you know. It's enough to make them desperate. And desperate people make mistakes, I finished. Exactly." I turned back to the window, trying to steady my breathing. Every fiber of my being screamed to run, to take Emma and vanish into the night before this madness swallowed us whole. But it was too late for that. I had agreed to this, and now I was a piece on the board, one that couldn't be removed without collapsing the entire plan. "What happens if they don't come?" I asked. Alessio's jaw tightened slightly. "They'll come. They've lost too much to walk away now." Hours crept by with excruciating slowness. Midnight passed, then 1, then 2. Each tick of the clock felt like a countdown to something inevitable. I paced the room, every nerve stretched, to breaking. And then it happened. A faint crackle on Alessio's earpiece. Movement at the south perimeter. His head snapped toward the security monitors. Black shapes shifted on the screens, fast, precise, coordinated. They were already inside the property. Positions he ordered, his voice low but commanding. "Do not engage until they breach the second line." The lights in the mansion dimmed automatically. The hum of the security system deepened to a steady pulse. My heart hammered in sync with it. I wasn't ready for this. No one could ever be ready for this. Minutes later, the first sound came. The faint scrape of a lock. The creak of a door forced open somewhere below. Then footsteps. Several pairs. Moving quickly. They were inside. Alessio turned to me, his gaze steady. "Whatever happens, you don't speak unless spoken to. If they touch you, you don't fight. My men will end this before they get a chance to hurt you." I nodded, though my throat was too tight to speak. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Then the study door swung open. 5 men in dark tactical gear stormed into the room, their weapons trained on us. The leader, a tall man with icy gray eyes and a cruel smile, stepped forward. "Petrov sends his regards," he said in accented English. Behind him, 2 more men dragged someone into the room, beaten, bloodied, barely conscious. My breath caught when I saw his face. Mike. He was alive, but only just. His face was a mess of bruises, his hands bound behind his back. The Russians had found him before Alessio's men had a chance to extract everything. "Tell us where the copy is," the gray-eyed man demanded, pointing his gun at me, "or he dies first." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay calm. "I don't know anything." "Liar." He took a step closer, pressing the cold barrel of the gun under my chin. Before I could speak again, chaos erupted. The windows exploded inward in a shower of glass as Alessio's men stormed the room. Gunfire thundered, sharp and deafening, winning out the sound of my own scream. The Russians scattered, firing back, but they were outmatched. It was over in seconds. When the last shot faded, the room was filled with smoke and the metallic scent of blood. The gray-eyed man lay unconscious on the floor. 2 others were dead. Mike was slumped against the wall, still breathing, but barely. I pressed myself against the wall, shaking uncontrollably. Alessio crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbing my face in his hands and forcing me to meet his eyes. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. I shook my head. My voice came out as a whisper. "Emma, she's safe. Rosa's with her. No one even got close." Relief hit me so hard my legs gave out. Alessio caught me before I fell, his hands steady and strong. "It's over," he said quietly. "They won't come again." But even as he said it, I knew it wasn't true. This war was far from over. Petrov's men might have failed tonight, but men like him didn't stop until every debt was paid. And somewhere deep down, I realized something terrifying. We weren't just witnesses anymore. We were part of this world now, bound to it, and there was no going back. The night after the attack felt heavier than any before it. The rain had stopped, the house had been secured, and yet sleep was impossible. Every creak of the old mansion, every whisper of the wind outside sounded like footsteps. Every flicker of light across the walls made my heart pound. The illusion of safety was gone. Whatever invisible barrier had once separated me from Alessio's world had shattered completely. Now I was deep inside it, and there was no escape. Down the hall, Emma slept peacefully in the panic room, blissfully unaware of how close danger had come. I had spent hours beside her before Alessio insisted I rest, but rest was a luxury I could no longer afford. My body might have been in that room, but my mind was still replaying the night, the gunfire, the screams, the smell of smoke, and the way Alessio had looked at me when it was over. Like I was no longer just a woman he was protecting. Like I was something else. The door to the study opened softly behind me. I didn't need to turn to know it was him. Alessio's footsteps were unmistakable, confident, deliberate, controlled. He came to stand beside me by the window, silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than I'd ever heard it. "We found 3 more bodies on the perimeter. They didn't make it inside." I nodded without looking at him. "And Petrov? Gone. But not for long. He's regrouping, and next time, he'll bring an army." The words hung in the air between us. Cold, heavy, final. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Now we end this," Alessio said. "No more running. No more waiting for them to come to us. We take the fight to them." I turned to face him, shocked. "You mean go after Petrov directly?" "It's the only way this ends. He won't stop until he gets what he wants. And as long as Michael is alive, they'll use him as leverage." My stomach twisted. Michael. He was still in the mansion, locked away in one of Alessio's underground rooms, alive, but barely conscious. Part of me still hated him for what he'd done, for the betrayal, the lies, the danger he'd brought into our lives. But another part of me couldn't help but remember the man he had once been, the man I had loved. "He's Emma's father," I said quietly. Alessio's eyes hardened. "He's also the reason your daughter is in danger. And as long as he's breathing, that danger will never go away." I knew he was right, and yet the thought of letting Alessio finish what he'd started made something deep inside me ache. It was the last piece of my old life clinging to me like a ghost. "There's another option," I said after a long silence. "Use him." Alessio's gaze sharpened. "What do you mean?" "If Petrov wants him so badly, then let him believe he's getting him. Use Michael as bait, lure them out, end it on your terms." It was reckless, dangerous, possibly suicidal, but it was the only idea that gave us a fighting chance without destroying what little humanity I had left. Alessio studied me for a long time, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded slowly. It could work, but it would require perfect timing. One mistake, and we all die. Then we don't make a mistake. The following days blurred into a whirlwind of preparation. Alessio's men forged documents, created false trails, and seeded disinformation across the city. Rumors spread like wildfire. Whispers that Michael had betrayed Alessio and was ready to trade everything he knew in exchange for protection. Petrov's network took the bait exactly as planned. By the third night, Alessio had what he wanted. An encrypted message traced to a warehouse near the docks, Petrov's stronghold. It was an invitation and a threat rolled into one. "We move tomorrow night," Alessio said, standing beside a table covered in blueprints and surveillance photos. "You stay here with Emma. This is not your war." "The hell it isn't," I snapped. "Petrov came after me. After my daughter. This is my war as much as yours." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time I saw something like admiration flicker behind his cold eyes. "Fine, but you follow my orders. Every second." The plan was simple, but the execution would be anything but. Michael would be transported to the warehouse in a secured convoy, appearing to be traded to Petrov's men. Alessio's soldiers would lie in wait, hidden in the shadows. And when Petrov came to collect, they would strike. The night of the operation, the tension was suffocating. I watched from a distance as the convoy rolled out under the cover of darkness. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, no matter how tightly I clenched them. I had been terrified before, of losing my home, of raising Emma alone, of sending one desperate text to the wrong number. But this was different. This was the fear of losing everything that was left. Hours later, the call came through. Alessio's voice was steady, controlled, but underneath it I could hear the storm. "We have contact. They're here." I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, my heart pounding, and then the line went dead. The silence that followed was worse than any gunfire. Every second stretched into eternity. My breath caught with every passing moment, and somewhere deep inside, I knew that the next time I saw Alessio Castelli, if I saw him at all, nothing between us would ever be the same again. The night smelled of salt and gunpowder. Down by the docks, the air was thick with tension, every shadow alive with the promise of violence. The convoy rolled to a stop outside the abandoned warehouse, an empty shell of steel and rust that now held the weight of everything that had led us here. This was where it would end, one way or another. From my vantage point in a surveillance van several blocks away, I watched it unfold on the flickering screens. Michael was dragged from the vehicle, his wrists still bound, his face pale and slick with sweat. Around him, Alessio's men moved like shadows, blending into the darkness, their weapons ready, but their eyes cold and focused. Then they appeared. Black SUVs, just like the ones that had once surrounded my building, now swarmed the perimeter. Petrov's soldiers poured out in waves, dozens of them, armed, ruthless, merciless. They moved with the brutal precision of men who had killed many times before, and would do so again, without hesitation. A tall figure stepped out from the lead vehicle. Even through the grainy feed, I recognized him. Viktor Petrov, the man who had sent assassins to my door, the man who would not rest until my daughter was either dead or used as leverage. "There you are." Alessio's voice crackled through my earpiece, calm but edged with iron, the spider in his web. I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white. My heart was racing so fast it hurt. The exchange began. Michael was shoved forward, stumbling as he was dragged toward Petrov's men. In return, one of Petrov's lieutenants stepped out, a flash drive held between two fingers, a mockery of diplomacy, a trade neither side intended to honor. It was a trap on both ends. Everyone knew it. And yet they moved forward, step by step, like actors in a play whose ending had already been written in blood. Petrov's voice carried across the dock, cold and cruel. "You think this ends here, Castelli? It ends when I say it ends." Alessio stepped into the light, his presence cutting through the chaos like a blade. "No, Petrov. It ends tonight." The world exploded. Gunfire erupted from every direction. Muzzles flared in the darkness, the roar of automatic weapons tearing the night apart. Petrov's men scattered for cover, returning fire in furious bursts. Alessio's soldiers surged forward, methodical and relentless. The air was alive with shouts, screams, and the sickening crack of bullets hitting flesh. Through the chaos, I saw Michael drop to the ground, crawling desperately toward cover. He was unarmed, terrified, and completely forgotten in the storm he had helped create. I slammed my hand against the door of the van. I couldn't stay here. Not when the man who had destroyed our lives was crawling toward freedom again. Against Alessio's strict orders, I slipped out into the night. The docks were chaos incarnate. Bullets whizzed past as I ducked behind crates and shipping containers, the ground slick with rain and blood. My only focus was Michael, the man who had nearly stolen my daughter, who had betrayed everyone, and yet who was still Emma's father. I reached him just as he collapsed against a crate, gasping for breath. His eyes widened when he saw me. "Sophie, what are you doing here?" "Ding this," I hissed. "You don't understand," he rasped. "Petrov, he's not the only one. There's someone worse, someone bigger. This was never just about the drive." But I never heard the rest. A gunshot split the night, and Michael jerked violently before crumpling at my feet. Blood pooled beneath him, his eyes staring blankly at the dark sky above. I didn't know who fired the shot. Maybe Petrov's men. Maybe Alessio's. Maybe it didn't matter. The man who had once been my everything was gone, and with him, the last tie to a life that no longer existed. A strong hand gripped my shoulder and pulled me back behind cover. Alessio's face appeared through the haze of smoke and chaos, his eyes sharp and unyielding. "Are you insane?" he shouted over the gunfire. "I couldn't let him run," I said, my voice shaking. "He's not running anymore," Alessio replied grimly. "Come on, it's not over yet." We moved together through the labyrinth of containers, fighting our way closer to the center of the battle. Petrov's men were falling back, their formation crumbling under Alessio's relentless assault. And then, through the smoke, I saw him. Petrov was retreating toward a waiting SUV, shouting orders in Russian. Alessio broke from cover, firing as he ran. Petrov's men returned fire, but they were too slow. Alessio closed the distance, tackling Petrov to the ground in a violent collision. The two men grappled on the rain-slick pavement, a brutal struggle that was more than a fight. It was a reckoning. Years of betrayal, blood, and vengeance collided in that moment, and when it ended, Petrov lay unconscious, bleeding and defeated. Silence fell over the docks. The gunfire ceased. The battle was over. It was dawn by the time we returned to the mansion. Rosa greeted us with tears of relief, and Emma ran into my arms, burying her face against my chest. I held her tightly, inhaling the soft scent of her hair, the warmth of her small body, grounding me in a reality that felt almost impossible. "It's over," I whispered into her hair. "It's finally over, Les." Io stood a few feet away, watching us quietly. His suit was torn, his hands blood-stained, but his eyes were steady. "You kept your promise," I said softly. "I always keep my promises," he replied. "Now it's time to keep mine to you." By sunset, the papers were ready. New names, new passports, new lives. Sophia Ellis and Emma Donovan would vanish from every record, replaced by identities no one could trace. We were free. But as I stood by the window, watching the last light fade from the sky, I felt a presence behind me. Alessio's voice was quiet, almost vulnerable. "You don't have to go." I turned to face him. "Why?" "Because I don't want you to," he said. "Because you've shown me something no one ever has. Loyalty without fear, strength without violence, love without condition. Stay with me." The offer hung in the air, heavier than any threat. I looked at Emma playing with Rosa's dog in the garden, at the life that was waiting beyond the walls, and then back at the man who had turned my nightmare into something else entirely. "I don't know what the future holds," I said honestly, "but I know I don't want to spend it running." "Then don't," Alessio whispered. "Stay, and build something stronger than fear." And so I did. One desperate text had changed everything. It had brought danger to my doorstep, shattered the fragile world I'd built, and forced me to face everything I'd been too afraid to confront. But it had also given me something I never expected: safety, purpose, and a future worth fighting for.